In 1929, a seemingly ordinary discovery was made in Istanbul. Researchers working in the quiet corridors of Topkapı Palace were organizing ancient documents. Records preserved for centuries, dusty papers, forgotten documents, countless correspondences from the Ottoman Empire. Many of these documents were valuable to historians, but none seemed likely to change world history, until researchers came across one of the old parchment fragments. At first glance, it was thought to be an ordinary nautical chart. Some parts of the parchment were missing, the edges were worn, some parts had disappeared over time. But when the map was carefully examined, something interesting emerged. This was no ordinary map. The African coast was shown on the map, the Atlantic Ocean was visible, and most strikingly, parts of the American continent were drawn. This caught the researchers' attention, because the date the map was drawn was quite old. A single name was written at the bottom of the map: Piri Reis, an Ottoman sailor, an admiral, a cartographer. But the name wasn't the most interesting part. The map itself was the most interesting part, because the notes written on the margins of the map contained extraordinary claims. These notes mentioned different sources: Portuguese sailors, old maps, sea voyages, and one of history's most famous explorers, Christopher Columbus. Some explanations on the map suggested that information obtained from Columbus's voyages was used. This raised a new question. How did an Ottoman admiral obtain information about one of Europe's greatest discoveries? Who gave him this information? And more importantly, was the map really as extraordinary as it was described? This parchment, found in Topkapı Palace, soon began to attract the attention of historians. Some thought it was simply a successful nautical map. Others, however, put forward very different ideas. Some believed this map was far ahead of its time. Others believe that what people find difficult to understand is not the map itself, but the knowledge network of the person who created it. Because Piri Reis was no ordinary sailor. He had traveled from port to port for years. He had spoken with sailors. He had collected old records. He had bought maps. He had gathered information from captains from different countries. And apparently, he had brought all this information together to create his own work. But the most interesting part of the story begins here, because one of the sources Piri Reis used was based on a journey that changed the course of world history. A fleet that crossed the Atlantic Ocean, a voyage into the unknown, and finally a new world discovered. Today, many people know the story of Christopher Columbus, but very few know that this story would reach the desk of an Ottoman admiral years later. Even fewer know that this connection helped to reveal one of the most mysterious maps in history. So how did it all begin? Why was Europe searching for new routes? Why did people want to go across the ocean? And what drove Christopher Columbus to sail to the ends of the earth? The answer to these questions takes us to the late 15th century, to the years when kingdoms chased after riches, to the days when sailors ventured into unknown waters, and to the beginning of one of history's most famous voyages. Because to understand Piri Reis's map, we first need to understand Christopher Columbus's voyage. When the map was found, no one thought it would be the beginning of a great mystery. After all, historians constantly encountered old maps. Some were important, some were worthless, and some were just ordinary documents from the past. In the early days, Piri Reis's map was approached similarly. But as time went on, something interesting began to happen. Researchers examining the map stopped at the same points and looked at it again and again. Because what they saw on the map was different from what they expected. First of all, the map showed a very large area: the coasts of Africa, the Atlantic Ocean, parts of the New World. And all of this was brought together in a single document. This alone was remarkable. But what was truly intriguing were the notes written on the margins of the map. These notes were not ordinary explanations. Piri Reis was practically speaking to the reader. He explained where the information came from. He explained which sources he used. And from time to time, he added his own interpretations. This made the map more than just a drawing. The map told a story. As researchers continued to read the notes, more names emerged: Portuguese sailors, old maps, sea voyages, different captains, different sources, and a fact that became clearer. This map was not the result of a single voyage. It was a combination of information collected over the years. But there was a strange situation here. In the 16th century, information did not circulate as easily as it does today. A discovery was sometimes kept as a state secret. A new route could sometimes bring wealth to a kingdom. Therefore, nautical charts were protected with great care. So then, how did an Ottoman sailor access so many different sources? This question began to attract the attention of historians. But there was something even more interesting. The mystery of the map was not only the information it contained. The real mystery was that this information came together in one place. It was as if pieces from different corners of the world were placed into a single jigsaw puzzle. And the person who put this puzzle together was Piri Reis. But the most striking piece of the puzzle had not yet been revealed. Because one of the names mentioned on the edges of the map was very different from the others. This name did not belong to an ordinary sailor. It did not belong to an ordinary captain either. This name was connected to a voyage that changed the course of world history, Christopher Columbus. And this is exactly where the mystery grows even more. Because even today, historians continue to ask the same question. Could Piri Reis have really accessed Columbus's information? If he did, how was this information transported from one end of the Mediterranean to the other? And more importantly, how many different people's traces were actually behind this map? Today, thanks to the internet, we can access information from anywhere in the world in a few seconds. But the situation was completely different in Piri Reis's time. Information moved slowly, sometimes by ship, sometimes by a merchant, sometimes by journeys lasting years. Information related to seafaring was extremely valuable. A new port, a new route, a new coastline. These were not just geographical information, they were power, they were wealth, and sometimes they could change the fate of empires. Therefore, sailors did not easily share the information they possessed. Maps were protected, logbooks were kept secret, discoveries were kept secret. But the Mediterranean had a peculiar characteristic. No matter how hard they tried to keep secrets, information eventually circulated. From one port to another, from one captain to another, from one ship to another, and Piri Reis was right at the center of this world. He wasn't just a sailor who traveled the seas, he was also a careful observer. He listened to the people he met. He talked to captains. He collected the stories of sailors. And apparently, he never forgot anything he heard. Over time, he developed an interesting habit. He started collecting information. When he saw a map, he wanted to examine it. When he heard about a new route, he wanted to take notes. When he met a captain from a distant country, he would talk to him for hours. Because he knew that pieces that seemed worthless to many people could one day become important. And as the years passed, these pieces began to accumulate. Information from different ports, sailors from different nations, records from different voyages, all of this gradually formed a vast network of information. But sometimes information wasn't spread only through word of mouth. Some information came from captured ships, some from lost documents, and some from old maps long forgotten by their owners. Therefore, when historians look at Piri Reis's map today, they don't see a single source. They see traces of hundreds of different stories. And perhaps this is the most striking aspect of the map. This map is not a map of discovery, it is a map of information, a compilation of pieces collected over the years. But among all these pieces, one stands out more than the others. Because Piri Reis specifically emphasizes it in his notes, Christopher Columbus. This name takes the mystery of the map to a completely different level. Because today, most of the maps Columbus used are lost. We don't know what they looked like. We don't know exactly what information they contained. But if Piri Reis's notes are accurate, some traces of this lost information may have survived. And if that's really the case, we may be facing one of the most interesting journeys of knowledge in history. Because the question we need to answer now is, how did Columbus's information reach the Mediterranean? And how did this information become part of Piri Reis's map years later? Today, Christopher Columbus's name is known almost everywhere in the world. But what's interesting is that for many years, historians have been more interested in something other than Columbus's voyages, the information he used. Because when Columbus sailed across the Atlantic, he wasn't heading entirely into the unknown. At least, he didn't think so. He had some calculations, he had some maps, he had some old sources, and all of this told him that if he sailed west, he could reach new lands. But there's a problem here. Most of the documents Columbus used haven't survived to the present day. Some were lost, some disappeared, and some were completely lost in history. Therefore, today historians only know the results. But we don't know exactly which maps were on Columbus's table. This is precisely where the Piri Reis map regains importance, because there is a striking statement in the marginal notes of the map. Piri Reis says that among the sources he used, he also included information from Columbus. This statement may seem ordinary at first glance, but think about it. An Ottoman admiral in the Eastern Mediterranean. He is talking about the sources used by a Spanish explorer. Moreover, this event takes place only a few decades after Columbus's voyage. So how could this be possible? Who carried the information? Who saw these maps? Who copied them? And most importantly, how did this information reach from one end of the Mediterranean to the other? Today, we cannot give definitive answers to all of these questions, but there are some clues. At that time, sailors were constantly traveling, ships were sailing between ports, merchants were carrying information, maps were changing hands, and sometimes a captured ship carried not just cargo, but something far more valuable: information. Perhaps that's why the Piri Reis map still attracts so much interest today, because this map doesn't just show the continents, it also shows how people shared information. It shows how rival empires unknowingly influenced each other, and sometimes it reminds us that the greatest discoveries in history didn't belong to a single person. But amidst all this, there is a question whose answer is still unclear. What was in Columbus's maps, which are now lost? And could Piri Reis really have accessed some of this information? This question brings us to the center of the next chapter, because now our focus is no longer on Piri Reis, Columbus's lost maps, and a mystery that has remained unsolved for 500 years. Perhaps the most important secret of the Piri Reis map is not in what is visible on the map, it is hidden in what we can no longer see today.
Thank you for watching the Cipher History. Don't forget to like and subscribe, so we can keep decoding the secrets of history together. See you in the next mystery.